Hello students, I welcome you to another lecture on AECC English Communication, and today we are going to discuss the process of communication. This is lecture 2. In the last lecture we had discussed what exactly the word communication means. We had talked about its origin and I had given you a couple of definitions. You are free to use any one or two or even three of them. We had also talked about the various characteristics that communication has, and today we are going to talk about what exactly is the process. So let's begin. Before understanding the process, we need to know that communication is a social activity and it is an essential condition of our existence, and it can be called as the most important activity of a human world. We will cease to exist if the process of communication ceases. If there is no communication, the advancement and growth that we witness in the world around us is all going to come to a standstill. So communication is a very important fabric of our being. This is just a reminder of what it is. It can be defined as the act of giving, receiving, or exchanging information. It's a dynamic process. There is a to and fro movement happening, ideas as well as opinions, so that the message can be understood by both parties. So, this is what results in effective communication, which we are going to discuss shortly. It is the process of transmitting information and common understanding from one person to another. Another important thing to note is that it is a learned skill that one has to acquire. It's not something which is inherent. People are not born with the skill of communication. They have the ability to talk, but the skill of communication is something that you work on, grow, and nurture over a period of time. The process of communication will only be considered to be complete when it is effective, when it results or gives you output. Then only will the process of communication be complete. Otherwise, ineffective communication is not desired. If the process of communication is not effective, it serves no purpose. That is why it is important that the process of communication needs to be always effective. Okay, so for the ease of understanding the process of communication, there is a flowchart which you are able to see on your screen, and this is going to explain how the process actually works and what is happening in that process of communication, which we want to be effective. On the left side of my screen, you will be able to see a sender, and on the right side of the screen, you should be able to see a receiver. So, in the process of communication, there is at least one sender and there is one receiver. Now, who is the sender? What does he want? The sender is the person who initiates the communication process. What is the meaning of the word initiate? Initiate means who wants to start the communication process. He can also be defined as a person who has a need or a desire to convey a message to another. That message can be in the form of an idea, it can be in the form of concept, information, emotions. So the sender has a need to send or convey an idea or a message to another person. On the right side of the screen, you should be able to see the receiver. Who is the receiver? The receiver is the individual to whom the message is being sent. Now, how does the sender send the message? Now, the sender first encodes the message. How is he encoding the message? By using words, symbols, gestures in order to compose a message. So, the first work that sender does is encoding the message in the form of written word or even sentences, right, in order to compose the message. Now, message is the outcome of the encoding which takes place and it can be in the form of verbal, non-verbal, or even written form of communication. So there can be various forms of messages. Now, the message, we must remember, is sent through a channel or a medium. Now, this channel or medium becomes the carrier of communication. What can be the various channels or mediums? The message can be sent via phone or email, or in person, meaning having a face to face conversation, or through messaging apps that we have today, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, whatnot. So, that is the channel or medium. Now, mediums are used to send the message, they act as a carrier. And when the receiver receives the message, what he does is that he tries to decode it. The sender had encoded the message, the receiver tries to decode it in order to understand the message. Now, the process of communication is still not complete. What is the next step is that the receiver needs to give a kind of feedback to the sender. Now, how will the receiver give the feedback? The receiver will again encode his feedback and he will send it to the sender, and the sender will decode the feedback in order to understand it, and then the process of communication comes to a complete. Feedback is reply, response, and it is very important. Unless and until a feedback is received by the sender, the process of communication is not considered to be effective or complete. I hope you have understood till this point of time. Another important aspect of this whole process of communication is that there is something called as noise, which is an ever present aspect in the process of communication. There are three kinds of noises. First is a physical noise, a psychological noise, and a physiological noise. So the flowchart explained the whole process of communication, and the next few slides is just going to be the written explanation of what is happening in the process. We can just go through it quickly. So it is just going to be like a recap. In the process of communication, there is one sender and one receiver. The sender is the person who is trying to send a message to the receiver, and the receiver is the person to whom the message is being sent. The sender is trying to send a message which can be in the form of an idea, concept, information. Now, how does the sender send the message? He encodes the message by selecting words. It can be symbols. We have talked what symbols are, we have talked what gestures are, and he composes a message. Now, there needs to be an understanding that is supposed to be reached between the sender and the receiver. If the sender tries to send something to the receiver and the receiver does not understand it, the process of communication will be called as ineffective. It does not gets completed. So the sender should encode the message in such a way so that it is understandable to the receiver as well. The message is actually the outcome of encoding. So when the sender is trying to encode something, it takes the form of a message. It can be verbal when you're trying to speak to somebody. It can be non-verbal. Your gestures are considered to be non-verbal. Facial expressions are considered to be non-verbal, or any kind of written form of communication when we give reports. So this message, which is in an encoded form, is sent through a channel. You can call a person, you can email a person, and this is emailing, this email, this phone calls, these messaging apps, these are called as a medium, and they serve as a carrier of communication. They act as a carrier of communication. Now, the receiver receives the message, but he has to decode it in order to understand it. He decodes the message, he is able to understand the message, and then he necessarily has to send a kind of feedback. Simple word for feedback is a kind of reply or a response. So the receiver sends a feedback to the sender in the same manner in which the sender had sent it to the receiver. What does the receiver do? The receiver encodes the feedback and the sender has to decode the feedback. When this whole process, the message being sent and the feedback being received, is complete, then the process of communication is considered to be complete. When the process of communication results in common understanding, we can call the communication process to be effective. Both parties need to understand what was being communicated, both the message as well as the feedback. If the message is not clear, it will be considered to be ineffective. If the feedback is not clear, again it will be considered to be ineffective. So there needs to be a common understanding between the sender as well as the receiver, and both need to understand what the message was and what the feedback was. As I told you earlier as well, the process of communication is accompanied by an ever present, it is always present, noise. We are going to end today's lecture at this point of time. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about what are the 3 types of noises in detail. Thank you.